As I was listening over and over, just to focus in and see how we can present this even clearer, and it should be more meaningful. What does it mean that machshava is something which is revealing one's inner realities to oneself? And then it assumes a different form. It assumes this form of a formal form, so to speak, in words and letters, to the point where it can then be translated in dibur, speech, which is completely strange, so speaking, outside of the nefesh. As I was thinking, I recognized very simple, very clear, and straightforward demonstration of this phenomenon. And that is, going back to our Utzwar table, as we know it, the table is something which takes up room in the physical world. And it has a certain form so that it can balance itself. And also it belongs, so to speak, in a room and so forth, all the things that we've discussed. If you're going to go back, top-down perception of what a table is, the justification for going top-down is, as we discussed many times, that a person really relates to a table at a much more deeper and significant level than its functional usage. It's something that a person have a personal affinity with. To the extent, as we pointed out, when people want to get together and discuss something, without partaking of any services, food or books or anything, they said, let's sit around the table. That table concept is a totally nefesh concept. It has no presence in the world. When we begin to think of a table in thought, then the table, I'm jumping, let me go back one step. The initial table has no legs, has no particular environment in which it stands. That initial table is a table that belongs to the human being. It serves and it's identified by the human spirit, the human dignity. It stands on air without being supported. It stands because it belongs there. It has no particular function. It's part and parcel of the human dignity. It's created by the human dignity. There is no other cause for it. That table has no description, has no words, is not part of machshava as yet. when one begins to think of a table in thought, the only way to think of it in thought is to give the table a place and have the table stand on its own. The table does not stand on its own without legs and without being dependent on the floor and relating to its environment. It no longer floats. It no longer is a truth related to the human being, a truth because the human being is true. Now it has to recognize, so to speak, and it extends to the environment. There's a room, there's a floor, and you have to make the table stand in this environment. Not based on what it means to you, but on the basis of where it is, its own environment. This is where machshava comes in. This is where machshava gives it a form, initial form. The initial form is it's going to stand somehow in this place. Number one, there's a space around outside of my thought where it exists. This is where the table acquires a definition, and this is what is called oisius, words, a language, a definition. What is it? It is no longer an outcome of my own spirit. It is something that should be defined outside of myself. And in order to be defined outside of myself, it has to have a form, number one, and you have to have a means by which you define it. Words and letters, a language, relative position, and so forth. Thus, when this table enters the world of thought, then it begins to acquire a form. Besides that, it has its own definition in terms of its service. It has a form. Now, if you want to have the table in the room, you have to have legs for the table. How is it going to stand? And where is it going to stand? And how you're going to partake of it?
In this marshal, you land up with a physical object, but what about more human elements like loyalty or seichel, or that don't take on a physical structure?
Okay, so this is the point. Like you wrote, a human being is expensive. In other words, yes, indeed, there is the essential element in the nefesh, but part of the essential element.
On this call, press 1. Returning to the conference room.
The nefesh, a human being also is an entity in the world. He has a world in which to function. He is here because there is a world. He is here to make a world. He is not here to be himself, to sleep his days away. That's not what he is, but what he stands for. That's not the creature, human being called a human being. As we mention all the time, right on the onset, the Rebbe planned the human being before he was created. He said, "I'm planning to make a human being, and what is this human being? He is going to rule the world."
So, this is like saying a man's innermost truth has to become a revealed speech.
That's right. And because here's an important point. Innermost truth of the man is not what he creates for himself, but what the Creator has assigned to him. This is an important and very important principle. And this is why the human being is so important in the world. Because he brings along the Creator with him. He doesn't stand for himself. He stands for the mission that the Creator assigned to him. The minute he enters a room, a place, he immediately begins to fashion it according to the principles and the dignity of the Creator. He cleans it up, sets things up, and so forth. This is what the human being is. And this is why that which is in his nefesh ultimately translates in machshava, in thought, which means it translates in an outside environment. But this outside environment is outside environment out of his nefesh, but not outside of his defined purpose. Not outside of the purpose of that the Creator assigned to him. This is not something that he arrives to, he discovers on his own. He was assigned to begin with this task. The human being is not a stranger in the world. He is not an intruder. He belongs there. On the contrary, he makes the world into a world. What would the world be without the human being, as we say all the time? This is where machshava comes in. Machshava is an external identity, but machshava is direct outflow of the reality of the human being. This is why we say machshava is le'atzmai. It is to himself. It identifies himself truly. How is a table on 4 legs himself? It is himself, in terms of his function, in terms of his mission, of who he is and what he is doing here. Since machshava identifies this human reality in a worldly environment, therefore clearly it has oisius. It has a defining factor, a means by which to define it. This is no longer part of him. This is his participation in the world. This participation in the world is not strange to him. Is not so to speak, an over force. This is part and parcel of his true identity. Because without his identifying of the Creator's assignment, he has no significance in being. Then this machshava, even though it's in thought, it's still le'atzmai, it's still identifying himself to himself. And since that this already has a form, excuse me, it is to himself, but it's not drawing from himself, it's drawing from the reality of the creation. This is why it can then go down into speech. Because the creation is something that all human beings share. Once you go into the creation, into the world, we are talking about the same thing. We're in the same reality. We're no longer into ourselves. This is why we can communicate. Because we are talking about the very same reality. We share this reality. This is the world that the REBBE created, provided for all human beings together. Not for one human being, for all human beings together. And each one has its own place and its own contribution. This is where speech develops, because speech is the means to communicate with your next neighbor. Who cares about neighbor? Neighbor is part of the world that you're living in. Part of your own reality that the Rebbe assigned to you. This is what we're learning about. Machshava is knowing himself to himself, but not knowing himself to himself inevitably will develop into knowing himself as part of the bigger reality, and then be able to communicate with the outside. It translates in speech. Again, we will start from the line that begins with Rosh Hashanah Design Tachtedes. This is 5 lines from the beginning of the second section on page Kuf Yud. Design Tachtedes, he says that the Machshava with Dibur is a good example, is a tangible and a vivid means by which to understand the union of Gimur Rishonis and Tayin Tachtedes. That which is bishvil for himself and for the outside. The Zayin Tachtenes hein bishvil oilomis. The 7 lower spheres, lower aspects, is bishvil oilomis, is for the sake of the world. The Gimel Rishonos, the 3 former or top beginning qualities, spheres hein, they are mashe b'dias atzmoi. This is where, as we said, b'dias atzmoi, by knowing himself, yedeya. But knowing himself, he knows. This is not that he knows because he had been exposed and he has now to function. He's not concerned in terms about function, about bestowing in anything, but it is knowing himself. Knowing himself. What's the significance of knowing himself? Knowing himself is that which relates himself to a bigger function, to a bigger reality. It's also knowing himself. Himself. But himself, this is a bigger himself. And this is why Yodeya, he knows it. Shehu inyan, which is the principle. Legal lois helem ho'atzmi le'atzmi kaviyoch, to reveal the inner and the helem, that which is in essence concealed, contained in atzmi, and to reveal it le'atzmi, to reveal to himself kaviyoch.
This gilui of himself to himself, on the one hand it sounds like sort of social, like it's a worldly occurrence. On the other hand it sounds like something of solitude.
No.
Or both.
No.
To remain on this call, press 1.
It's
Returning
not,
to the
it's
conference
not for a
room.
social purpose. It's for himself.
It's for himself, but it's for the assignment, the mission of being in the world.
That's part of himself.
Okay.
That's his own reality. What are you? What are you doing over here? Not for the world, for yourself. Okay, let's continue. The line is le'atzme kaviyochel. I'm Asher Kosov. Yitzchok.
Yes.
Do yourself over here. Take a safer look inside. I know you're a genius. This is, believe me, it's going to be a very good idea. Kuf Yud. This is why we're saying learning in the reality, not in your own mind. let me make it someplace. Yeah. Vai מה שכוסו בסוף הנקודתר, ימצא להוי מה שכוסו ביצס חיים ספר גימו. בעניין מחשבה ודיבור, in נקודת תרא it's also about מחשבה ודיבור. So to speak, a revolutionary statement. שהכל לעצמי. That really, over there he explains, מה שכוסו in explaining Etches Chaim, that hakol yatzmi, the whole phenomenon of machshava and dibur, not only his thought, is to identify himself in reality, but dibur is also yatzmi. Rak, except, what's the difference between dibur and machshava? Shehadibur hu le'atzmoi bishvil hazulas. Dibur is to himself. It is for himself, bishvil hazulas, for the sake and in order to be able to communicate with the zulas. This is what we said, that communicating with the zulas is le'atzmai. It is le'atzmai bishvil hazulas. Bishvil hazulas means for the sake of the zulas. Okay, this is really a new stage in this whole discussion. Ukmoy, similar to what it says. Omra, he said this over, this thought. Omra, he said it over. Dalet pa'omim, 4 times. Beinay leveinatzmi. Beinay leveinatzmi, to himself. Speaking to himself. He repeated it 4 times to himself. What is meaning? He said it 4 times, beinay leveinatzmi, to himself. He said it to himself as if he was speaking to someone else. So this is speaking to someone else, but within himself. This is how real speech develops, so to speak. It begins in machshava and so forth, until it goes down from machshava into dibur. But before it is dibur in factual things, speaking to others, he is speaking to himself. Beinay leveinatzmai. If it's dibur, beinay leveinatzmai, why does he need to speak? He can think. There is significance in speaking to himself. And what is significance of that speaking to himself? It is to allow and to include the outside in his own thought. So the dibur is in a different stage. It is bishvil hazulas. But it is bishvil hazulas within himself. That's the initial dibur. V'hamachshava hu hagilui yatzmai. Machshava is the gilui to himself. It's also gilui. It's also formulation. But it is a formulation to himself.